Hi, I'm Marlene from the Geek and Review, and I have Stephanie Wilkins from Legal Technology Hub here today to tell us about some exciting updates to the Gen AI map that Legal Technology Hub puts out.
Yeah, thanks, Marlene. It's hard to believe, but we're getting ready to do another quarterly update to our Gen AI legal tech map. It's been 3 months since we did our last one of all the solutions and legal tech that have
That's such
incorporated
a
Gen
long
AI to
time
date.
with Gen AI.
I know it's like a year, right? In Gen AI years. But that was in fact at the end of June. At that point in time, we saw 638 Gen AI product placements by 505 vendors in 19 different categories, which was actually 100 more products than we saw just 3 months before. So to your point, 3 months is a very long time. Of course, since then, we've been working on other maps, such as our AI agents in legal map and the justice tech map we did with the Justice Technology Association, which we'll continue to update. But we're back to focusing on Gen AI map, Gen AI solutions. It's time to revisit that. And now, every time we do one of these maps or update it, we inevitably hear from people who think they should be included or say they didn't know about it. And we, of course, do posts on LinkedIn calling for the information, and we still get those comments. So consider this your notice. If you have a legal tech offering that incorporates generative AI, we want to know about it. Because if we don't know, we can't include you. It's just that simple. But help us help you. You can let us know what you're up to by reaching out to us via email at curation@legaltechnologyhub.com. And if you want to see the previous maps, if you don't know what it is what we're talking about, to get a sense of what we're looking for, you can go to legaltechnologyhub.com, type in map in the search bar, click on the contents in the search results, and you'll see a number of those graphics. And we can't wait to hear what you're up to and have us add you to our next map.
Yeah, it's a fantastically useful tool, and everybody should go check it out. So thank you, Stephanie.
Great, thanks.
Welcome to the Geek and Review, the podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal industry. I'm Marlene Gaybauer.
And I'm Greg Lambert.
This week, we welcome Gabe Pereyra, president and co-founder at Harvey. Gabe, it is great to have you on the Geek and Review.
Yeah, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Gabe, you've had kind of a muted background in your career. So, just working at little places, like Google DeepMind and Google Brain, and you went from
Nothing
that
fancy.
to co-founding a legal tech startup. So, one, why would you make a decision to go into law and think that, that's the right domain to apply this expertise that you learned at Google? And, and how did you and, Winston Weinberg come up with the idea to kind of shape what Harvey is?
Yeah. I started doing AI research maybe a decade before starting Harvey. And so kind of 2014, right when deep learning was starting to take off. And the way I ended up at DeepMind at Google Brain was kind of reaching out to, now they're called the godfathers of AI, but Yoshua Bengio, Jeffrey Hinton, some of the folks that kind of were the early pioneers of this stuff. And both my parents were PhDs in CS, and they did kind of adjacent stuff in their careers. And so I think I was kind of always drawn to it, but I always knew I wanted to apply this technology. And so a lot of doing research at the time was really deeply understanding this technology. And then kind of half my time was research, and then half was trying to figure out where to apply this. And I was always drawn to these kind of like large societal problems. And I thought for me, it was going to be education. I left DeepMind to start kind of like a personalized education company. And like, to me, it felt very meaningful to like use this technology to help society in some way. I think it was kind of early at the time, and there were some challenges with doing this in education. But then when I was at Meta working on large language models, I was kind of having the same thoughts of like, where do we apply this technology? And Winston and I were best friends. We were roommates. He was working at O'Melveny and Myers as a litigation associate. And I was brainstorming with some of my friends from Google Brain, kind of just general, horizontal assistant type ideas. And he said, "Oh, why don't you build an assistant for legal?" And started showing me his workflows, his legal tech. I showed him the language models. He started kind of asking it some of the questions that, he was working on, things like that. And kind of right off the bat, it seemed like this perfect application. And then the more we dug into it, we reached out to Sam and Brad at OpenAI. They showed us GPT-4. We got funding from them. Kind of felt like all stars aligned of like perfect co-founder, perfect industry, perfect timing with this technology. My brother also was a lawyer, worked at Allen Overy, now works at Harvey. And so had just like a bunch of exposure and getting to work with both of them. And yeah, I didn't think I would do legal, but it feels like kind of the perfect application.
Yeah, I learned something new this week that I didn't know about the OpenAI's when they released the chat bot version. They were actually, I think they released it like either 3.0 or 3.5 right at the beginning there. And it was more just to kind of test it, and they didn't expect it to really kind of take off because they were already developing 4 in the background, and we're working with folks like you. And so I think they were really surprised at how it just kind of caught fire right out of the gate. I mean, when you were talking with Winston, and one of the things that I've always pointed to with this type of technology is this is really kind of the first time that we've had technology that does well with language. Do you think that's what was kind of the key driver for that in adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big intuition we had and around ChatGPT was that really the models are the product. And so like a lot of the startup advice we got when we were starting Harvey was kind of pick a very narrow application, go draft NDAs, make that work really well. And I think the thing we felt really strongly, so we got early access to GPT-4 about 6 months before ChatGPT was released. But the product we built was kind of what you see now of like talk to the model and interact with it to solve this work. And it was just so general and so powerful where we would show it to, in-house lawyers, partners, associates, and every different type of task they tried to do, the models could kind of do some percentage of that task. And so it didn't make sense to kind of fit these models to the kind of some narrow use case. It was much more of like, how do you build this very broad horizontal tool? And then I think like to your point, it's like when I think of how most lawyers work, like a lot of their workflows are email, right? Like if you're an associate, you're getting emailed these like tasks or prompts from a partner. You need to go use this legal tech and kind of produce some text as a response back, whether it's like a Word document or an answer to that email. And so the original idea was that it's like, can you mimic a lot of this workflow? Can you kind of build an AI associate that is able to make every associate kind of empowered and kind of a partner where they can manage this little army of associates?
So I can't believe that it's only been 3 it's only been 3 years. It just seems like
it feels like 30.
it feels like it's longer, right?
Yeah.
But it's true. It has been 3 years since Harvey came to market, and it's an amazing story. You've been able to penetrate so much of the large law firm market in so short a time. As you got new clients and gathered new intel, like what was there that law firms, the problems that law firms were having that you seemed to fill? And was that something you kind of came on the market with, or have you adapted since then?
Yeah, so I think we did a lot of counterintuitive things very early on. I think kind of the traditional startup experiences like go for individual users or smaller parts of the market and try to move upstream. And I think when we were starting, we had this strong intuition where if we could start working with big law firms, the largest law firms, that would be the best place to start. And we weren't sure if that was going to be possible. Like at the time, the models still made mistakes. There was kind of like a lot of question marks. And I think we got super fortunate meeting David Wakeling at A&O. We showed him this. He was kind of a senior partner at A&O that also did a lot of their innovation work. And he was like, this is the technology I've been looking for. I've been kind of thinking about legal tech. And so we got a bunch of traction with them. And that like really validated our hypothesis of like, this is super useful and actually more useful for these massive law firms that have a bunch of layers of review. So the mistakes of the model get kind of caught by more senior lawyers as they review it. And then I think from there, kind of the core problems were, especially at the time, there was a bunch around security, data privacy. Do we want to send this data to foundation models? How do we get kind of dedicated capacity and all the security problems? And then I think the part that we've built around is like, if you use ChatGPT or any of these basic language models to do programming, legal, any like complex knowledge work, you really quickly run into the edges, whether it's not connected to my data, it's not connected to the systems I use, it doesn't have some of the expertise that I need. And so a lot of it has been just putting this into the hands of lawyers, listening to them, figuring out, hey, I'm working on this diligence. I need this connected to my data room. I want case law. And so figuring out how do we build all these pieces at the individual lawyer level. And then increasingly, as you roll this out to the entire law firms, they need things like, how do I manage all my matters, ethical walls, how do I collaborate with clients? And so a lot of it has evolved from, we had some intuition, and then now as we've scaled, it's like talking to all of our law firms and figuring out how to make them better.
Yeah, I think I believe like you have had a lot of impact and um, have helped firms sort of overcome some of those ethical hurdles in terms of using the product, right?
Yeah, no, and I think there's still challenges, right? Like right when we started Harvey, there was kind of the bank letters that said, please don't use generative AI. Now that's shifted, and there's a lot of bank letters that said, please use generative AI. But I think there's still a bunch of questions of, where can you use client data? What can you train on? What can't you? And I think there is going to be this big opportunity to really think about like all of the expertise in these law firms that's, in the work they do in their partner's head. How do we help firms leverage all that, put that into models, into agents, but do it in a way that protects confidentiality, privacy, privilege, maintains ethical walls? And so I think there's a lot of like infrastructure data problems to still solve. Even just organizing this data, I think is still a big challenge.
Yeah. I think with the Allen and Overy being able to get in there, you jump the hurdle of the number one problem that most startups have in getting into large legal, and that is this is an industry that races for second place. And no one wants to be the first to go and try, especially new technology. And so, I think, some may say that's lucky, but I also point out that, you tend to make your own luck when it comes to these things. And so, getting over that hurdle, I think really kind of catapulted the ability to get that second, third, and 50th firm to come in and when most sales cycles for legal tech is very long. So
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right.
yeah. So you were talking about the chatbot interface, but that's kind of the beginning stages of what you were doing, and now you have Outlook add-ins, Word enhancements, the workflow builder, which is really interesting. And so there's this whole attempt to do what a lot of legal tech startups want to do, which is be in the area where the lawyers are working, in that into the products that they're already working in. So, couple of questions on that. How are your users kind of leveraging these new, kind of improvements to improve their workflow? And then more importantly, because I think we're coming into the year of show me what you've done for me for my bottom line. Are you finding that there's any metrics that you've been able to collect to show a real true ROI on using these tools?
Yeah, so I would say to me, the biggest challenge whenever you get the use case question is the similar when people ask, like, what are you using ChatGPT for? And the answer is kind of like everything. But I think the experience.
I drop my email in it and tell it to write a response.
Yeah, I mean, I've started, it's like I just put all of our company documents into it and start thinking about like, how do you synthesize all of these things? And it's like, I think this and Harvey, that's kind of the big use case of like, I didn't work in legal, but I worked in investment banking. And if you're working on a deal, you're getting all these emails, you need to draft these things, you need to research, you need to go learn about this like specific company or industry that you don't know anything about, and then the case law precedent for that. And so it's kind of just all of this and kind of handling the complexity. But I think the big challenge is obviously you're working in a bunch of different tools, your context is scattered everywhere. And so a lot of what we're thinking about is how do we create like a Matter workspace where if you're working on a specific deal or a litigation, you can leverage generative AI over all of that context in some like powerful and secure way. And so connecting to Outlook, Word, increasingly like data rooms, DMS, case law, eDiscovery platforms, things like that. We want to bring this all into one place. And I think one nice metric we see in our product usage is we have pretty strong kind of daily active users if you're just using the Harvey Assistant. But what we see is a upward trend as you start using more product surface areas, to the point that if you're using 4 Harvey surface areas, it's something like 70% daily active users. And so you're really starting to see, okay, you can use this to do a lot of your work. And then I would say the challenge with the ROI story is what we're starting to do with some firms is, can we look at your billables and look at, for example, the work that gets written off, and how do we start using Harvey to do all of the unrealized legal work that you're doing? But I think where we've seen the really big ROI stories is increasingly with law firms and their clients. We're working with them to build these more specialized workflows. And so, for example, we're doing this with Orrick, we're doing this with A&O, PwC, some other law firms we can't disclose. But I think a lot of it is localizing it to practice areas, because I think the big challenge is when you use Harvey as a horizontal assistant, it's hard to map this to ROI. But as we start working, for example, with private equity firms and fund formation, then what you can do is say, okay, I'm doing fund formation for like a Blackstone. They have kind of, here's their LPA process, here's their comment memo process, here's how they negotiate side letters. Can we take all of our law firm's expertise about fund formation, what they know about Blackstone, put this together into some workflow that makes that efficient? And then you can start talking about metrics like, we can do this fund formation more effectively, we can get better results. And so that's kind of how we're starting to build some of this ROI story.
Yeah. I'm curious on one thing with ROI, and Marlene and I had a conversation earlier in the day about this, is that there are some benefits that you get from tools like Harvey and others that are really hard to measure. And that is things like, one is I can do something that I couldn't have done before. And so there's like no benchmark for that. And then the other thing is that just the lack of frustration in just doing your daily job, there's real value in that, but that's not a time hours calculation.
It's like return on experience.
Yeah.
This is actually interesting, where PwC is a good example where they've actually managed to quantify some of this, where they've said that using Harvey in their early year associates is actually a really big recruiting benefit. And so they are actually able to improve recruiting because, like, there are other places where you go and you can't use this technology. And once you use this in your personal life, you're like, I need to use this. And so I think there is, to your point, it is harder to measure, but there's these indirect benefits. But I remember early on, Winston showed me a Fishbowl, which had kind of all this like big law chatter, kind of like people talking about it. And there was kind of first year.
We actually had the Fishbowl.
I mean, it's an awesome, and there was associates saying like, I would trade my bonus for like a working laptop. And so I think this is like really a thing of just quality of life. But I mean, what we're starting to work with firms is like, at different time scales, how do you measure these things? Because I think a lot of these things you will end up capturing in terms of like better recruiting classes, winning more business. And so we're starting to think a lot and work with firms to figure out how to measure that, because I do think these are kind of the important benefits.
I mean, do you ever get any, I don't know, pushback's not the right word, but people that are like nervous, like they're like, we were talking about, associates and the experience that you were sharing is they want this thing. And I've seen that too, but at the same time, are they worried?
Yeah.
this is going to take my job type of thing. And if you hear that, kind of how do you cope with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think we get this a lot. And to me, this is a bigger problem beyond just legal, right? Like these models are getting very, very good. And it is scary, like as they start doing more, like they do PhD level math, right? Like they are very good. And so, I mean, a lot of what we're starting to talk with firms are, in a couple years when these models are, maybe senior associate level, how are you training your next class of partners? How are you training associates? And I mean, what I will say is like there will probably be some structural changes as these models get better. But I would say the opportunity is also like when I think about when I was learning programming, 13 years ago, it's like I went on Stack Overflow. I would go read like most questions. I was just like, I can't figure this out. I guess I'm just going to not learn this. And now with these models, you can just ask them and they teach you. And it's like now when I'm learning about legal, about private equity, it's like, this is it. They're incredible. And so we're starting to work with firms to think about, how do we build curriculums? How do we build training resources where you can take past deals and say, okay, I want to learn how to do fund formation. What is the general process? How would I negotiate this LPA? What are the parts that matter? And so I think you'll be able to upskill people much more quickly. But I still think this is like a big challenge and something like we and law firms need to think a lot about. We also partnered with law schools. So I think that's kind of another really good way to do this, of giving students this technology and helping them figure out like this is the new way to practice law.
Like they can help figure out what it's going to look like. Yeah, I really love that idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually on LinkedIn, I had someone reach out because I had posted some things that you guys were doing, and her response was, well, how do I trust that if I give it to or tell it to give me a timeline on all these documents, and other than me going in and reading every single document, are you still
How do we do that
seeing
with
that?
eDiscovery?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And I mean, we're building these workflows with some litigation firms of can you build chronologies and things like this. And I mean, I think part of what is missing from these foundation models is that like law firm expertise or intuition, where it's like, what is a chronology? How do you build a good chronology? And so I think a lot of what we're starting to think about is like, if you think of the expertise of these law firms, it is how do you build that work product? How do you evaluate it? And so a lot of what we need to help law firms build is how to build all of the guardrails and the ways to train these models. So if you build a chronology, you can quickly evaluate that. And I think that will be a lot of the transformation, right? Like if you think of like what it is really learning to be a senior associate, a big part of that is like, I have a bunch of first year associates that also don't know what a cron is and are maybe going to make mistakes. And like part of me scaling my managerial ability is like, I know which parts of their work to check. I know how to sample parts and be like, okay, this guy seems pretty burned out. He should like redo this the next day or something like that. And so it's similar with the models, but I think the weird part is they make mistakes in like very unintuitive ways. And so part of it is just using them a lot. So you build that mental model of like, I put too much context, it's probably going to make a mistake here. And like a lot of that is just using the technology.
So I think we could talk about this kind of stuff all day long, but
Yeah.
but I am going to shift the conversation a little bit. So to talk about some of the new partnerships that Harvey has. So latest efforts are focused on adding partnerships for the data law firms need. So research with LexisNexis and Wolters Kluwer, internal data with iManage and NetDocs, and even getting into in-house partnerships with Ironclad. So what's the goal in creating the partnerships, and what do you think the outcomes will be?
I think the goal is obviously you want to get all the context in one place so you can leverage these models. I think when we think of the type of company we want to build, we don't want to build a CLM. We don't want to build legal research data sets. Like I think the companies building these have incredible expertise and it's kind of not our core competency. And so for us, the best world is how do we partner with them? Can we build these magical experiences where we can leverage the technology they've built within Harvey? In some cases, we're providing Harvey to them so they can use Harvey in their product. And I think that kind of how do we work with this industry to build this technology together is kind of the goal there.
Yeah. Do you see like the flip side of that? For example, I know, LexisNexis has come out with their own general AI tool similar to what you get started out with. So do you see kind of the cooperation, but also the what do they call it? Where you're competition or something like that, where
Yeah.
you're
And yeah,
competing,
I
but
think
also kind of yeah.
I think there'll always be some of that. And I think it like makes the industry better where I think we can learn from each other. I think as these agents get better, maybe these agents are able to like cooperate and hand things off where maybe you ask a generic legal research question in Harvey, we give you some answer and you want to dig deeper, and now you ask the Lexis agent or something like that. And so I think a lot of it is working together and figure out like where are the boundaries. I mean, I think one of the challenges with this technology is this interface blurs the boundaries between all of these product surface areas. And so that is just a new product challenge as you're building with partners and everyone. So I think something we're figuring out with these partners together.
Do you see more partnerships along the line?
I think we are definitely looking to partner. So we kind of have partnered with case law providers, DMS providers. We want to partner with data rooms and eDiscovery platforms. And I think probably eventually do billing as well. And so just thinking about, what are the things
The
lawyers
main
need to
data
do
points. Yeah.
their job well. And yeah, I think that's the thing where it's like you're always missing some of this context, and the more you can bring it in one place, I think that ends up being very powerful. Um, and so figuring out the best way to do that in Harvey.
Yeah. So you and I had a conversation leading up to this, which I kind of walked away from. And poor Marlene was on I think she had a conflict, so she couldn't sit in for the whole thing. But we ended up kind of talking about what your vision is for where Harvey is going next, and I actually looked at some of the growth that you've done this year, and I went on Google Gemini and had to do some deep research on, but it was talking about the growth, I think, between March and July, and it gave me a number of essentially you grew by $16.5 million a day in value in that time, which is crazy. But I think we see Harvey right now as a chatbot, a place to store documents, a place to access the AI and work with it. But you're not seeing that as kind of the four walls of where you are.
Yep.
And I know part of that is we talked earlier about being able to build your own workflows. And the way that I'm seeing that is you're kind of like lowering the barrier for law firms like ours to actually create products that we don't just sell our services to the clients, but may actually end up selling the products to the clients. Is that something that you see? And then I want to follow that one up after you
Yeah.
do that answer.
Yeah. I mean, we're already doing this. And so, I mean, when I think of like, what is the special sauce of these law firms, it is their expertise, right? And so when we think about long-term, what we want to enable for these law firms is you have thousands of the smartest lawyers in the world. How do you put all of that expertise into models, workflows, agents that you can either use to do your client matters more effectively, or increasingly you can package those into legal solutions that you can sell to your customers, either through Harvey or through, we've helped law firms build their own kind of white labeled products. And so that to me feels like the very big opportunity. We kind of just scratched the surface of this. We've started building these workflows with law firms and their clients in collaboration. But I think we're so far from where this can get to. And I think especially with how good these models will get, your ability to fine tune them, customize them. So yeah, that to me seems like one of the really big opportunities here.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked about, and you've written about, is looking at Harvey as what you're calling a complete matter management service. So from beginning to end, everything that is involved in the matter is in Harvey in some way or form. How can you explain that to us? What you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think if you use Harvey or most of these products today, they're still being used in somewhat of an ad hoc matter, right? Like you will upload documents, you'll ask some query. We have some client matter functionality, but I think when I think of the work of an associate, you're basically living in a specific client matter, right? You get assigned some number of these and you're working on a specific litigation or a specific transaction. And really the context you care about is what are all the emails, all of the work product, the work my coworkers are doing on that specific client matter, and then maybe precedent from similar client matters or knowledge my firm has about that client matter. And so I think the more we can centralize our product around kind of that unit, and then if you think of it as we start thinking about more than just lawyer productivity, but firm productivity, that's also kind of the unit that law firms care about, right? They want to ask questions like, what are all the matters we're working on? How much do we usually make from specific matters? Are we billing as much as we should for these different matters? What is all the work that I've done historically for this client? Can I find all their client matters and answer questions over that? And so I think kind of unifying that both in terms of the context. So one example is it's even pretty hard to just associate emails with a client matter. And so with some law firms, we're starting to talk about, can we build them systems that can classify their emails to the right client matter? So you have all that context in the right place. And then eventually, maybe connecting this to billing. And then I think you also need the client matter abstraction for ethical walls, right? I think that's another concern as you start using these systems on like a lot of client data. It's like, how are you, giving your clients confident that you're maintaining the ethical walls, you're protecting that data. At the end of that client matter, that data is getting deleted, for example. So I think there's kind of like, and if you look at most legal tech products, like they are built around this client matter abstraction to some extent. So I think kind of pulling all that together at that level is something we're building into the product.
Yeah. And one more thing that wasn't on the list, but I saw just dropped this week is you've now entered into the Australian market. And we've had Australians on before, and we know that their data rules are really kind of different than the rest of the world, where the data has to be there in Australia. So, how are you managing the regulatory work that requirements that now that you're essentially worldwide?
Yeah, so this is actually something we started solving from the very beginning. So right off the bat, when we started working with A&O, PwC, and then US law firms, we're already multi-region because of kind of some of the Europe requirements versus US. And so we have been building the infrastructure where law firms can store their data where they want. I think with some of these very large law firms with a PwC, you can have cases where the organization has different data requirements, different cloud requirements. And so exactly. And so like some of these very large law firms, you have different countries operate separately and don't actually share their tech and things like that. And so there is a lot as we're doing. And then when we work with large private equity firms, how do you kind of manage groups of these entities and things like that? And then all the data security, like you said, the compliance and regulatory. And so something we've been doing for like 3 years now, but a challenge as you kind of go into any of these countries.
So we are asking our guests now, like we want to know kind of what are areas that, where are places that you go to keep up with current events, to figure out what's happening in the market, to learn. We want to share it with our listeners because, clearly, you are a visionary. The folks at Harvey are visionaries. And so, we want to get in on some of that. It's like,
yeah, I mean, we were
how do you, it's like, other than looking in your Slack,
I was going to say,
which we joked about earlier.
Yeah.
Besides that,
I would say to me, the big sources. It's like I use ChatGPT in our web browsing to do a lot of this. I think these models are getting so good at synthesizing this content. And then I think part of the big challenge, especially for a lot of this AI stuff, is it's not being published anymore. And so I think we're super fortunate to work with all of the foundation model providers, the cloud providers. A lot of my friends from these research labs work at these places. And so you can get some intuition of, what's coming down the line in terms of AI. I think on the legal side, your guys' podcast, talking to our clients. But I think it really is just like talking to people. I think it is still challenging to find a lot of this news. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's challenging to find the news other than sort of general or applications. Like, okay, how does this apply to my situation? Those types of things. I think you're right. It still
Yeah.
requires sort of that connection with people to share, like, okay, this has been my experience, and or this is what's coming, this is how it might impact you, things like that.
No, and I think even if you can't talk with the right folks, it's like starting to find the right people you can follow on their podcasts, their Substacks, because I think it's always hard to find, like you said, the general, but you can usually find people that are talking about the specific thing. And so like when I was doing research, there was always like specific researchers where I'd read all their papers and like you could kind of follow the themes based on the work they were doing. I think that tends to work pretty well.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I found this is one area where you don't have to be in legal tech to get some, really good information. It's like this morning, I just learned that Claude now does great with Excel files, that it will actually, you can input Excel files with VLOOKUPs and it will understand how it is, which
Yeah. No, I mean, even for us, I think the model stuff is hard to keep up with. Like there's so much happening.
So we have come to the time where we have our crystal ball question, Gabe. And this is where you're kind of looking out into the future and telling us, we usually say the next couple of years, but maybe it should be the next few months. What do you think, Harvey or the legal industry needs to start addressing right now?
I would say the things we're thinking about and kind of some of the interesting research directions are really starting to think about how you customize these models, these workflows. I think a big question we get asked a lot from law firms is, if everyone is buying Harvey, what is our differentiation? And what I always tell them is, before Gen AI, you were kind of in the same position where everyone bought the same legal tech, but the differentiation really came from your lawyers, how you run your law firm, how you structure your practices. And I think that is going to be true in the future. I think it's just going to look different. And so a lot of the conversations we're having are not just, which legal vendors should you buy, but how do you upskill your associates? How do you train people to use this technology? What infrastructure should your firm be building? How should you be thinking about how you work with clients, how you, price legal services, how you communicate ROI to your clients? And I think the really big opportunity here for the industry is I think this technology will let law firms transform not just their tech stack, but their entire business. And I think you need to look at this holistically. But to me, that's kind of the big thing we're focused on, working with our law firms and their clients. And I think that will be the big thing next year.
Yeah. So you mean the values in our people, not necessarily our tech?
I think that's right. Yeah. I mean,
We
I think
still
like
need
the
critical and
infrastructure,
creative thinkers.
Yeah.
I think the law firms that learn to take their expertise and put these into models and workflows, I think those are going to be the most successful law firms. Because if you think of the challenge with law firms, your revenue scales with headcount, right? Like you can only bill so many hours. But the big opportunity here is if you can take that expertise, you can put it in models, you can sell that to your clients in new and creative ways. It's like now you can unlock exponential scale software margins. And I think there's kind of new business models for law firms that figure that out.
Awesome. Well, words to think about as we move forward. So, Gabe Pereyra, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us here on the Geek and Review. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you guys so much for having me.
And of course, thanks to all of you, our listeners, for taking the time to listen to the Geek and Review podcast. If you enjoy the show, share it with a colleague. We'd love to hear from you, so reach out to us on LinkedIn. And we've been posting on TikTok as well.
Yeah. All the kids are on TikTok,
Yeah,
right?
it's true.
So, Gabe, for our listeners who want to learn more about what you're doing at Harvey, where's the best place to send them?
I think the Harvey website, the blog, and if you're a law firm, definitely reach out to our team.
Awesome.
And as always, the music you hear is from Jerry David DeSica. Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah, I've got his album up on the wall back here.
Show it. It's up on the wall.
There it is.
All right. There we
Back
go.
here.
Promo
On
for
the
Jerry.
wide screen, you can see it. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.